Hello everyone, my name is Miss Ponyo. Welcome to another math tutorial. This week we are going to be learning how to round multi-digit numbers up to the millions, and we'll be getting a lot of practice in. So when we talk about rounding, or when we think about rounding, I know that a lot of different examples may come to your mind, and this is because we do this on a regular basis without even knowing. So here are some examples of times when we round, okay, or situations where we find ourselves rounding. Rounding is very much like estimating. So when we don't have the specific number that we are looking for, we can round. We can get a number that is pretty close to the one that we are looking for. And this may appear, for example, when you're doing your taxes and you're trying to figure out about how much did I spend maybe on gas this year. Or if you were baking something, you'd say to yourself, I think I need about 3 cups of water. Okay, so maybe not exactly 3 cups, but rounding or having that number gives you a pretty good sense, a pretty good idea. We also find ourselves rounding or estimating when we are out at a restaurant with family or friends, for example. If we spend, if we have a few different orders, then one thing may be $10.99, another thing may be $12.50, and we end up estimating and putting these numbers together so that we can have a general idea of what our total will be. Also, when we are thinking about how many people live in a place, like the United States, for example, right now with the census and all that, we can, instead of saying, because the United States is such a massive country that it's hard to tell the exact number of people that live here. So we estimate, or we round, like approximately or about or around 300 million people live here, for example, and with shopping. So these are just some situations, some examples where you already use rounding. So one of the best tools to use to round is a number line. A number line is just a great visual tool. It's something that we can see, we can make sense of, and we can kind of see the relationships between the numbers that we're working with. So if I had a number like 368, for example, this number line would be the perfect one to start out with and to use, because 368 falls in between 300 and 400. These are the 200s that this number 368 fall in between. Now, our midpoint, or the halfway mark, is 350. I know that 368 is greater than 350, right? Let's use what we talked about last week with comparing numbers and ordering numbers. So since 368 is greater than 350, we don't have to pay attention to the numbers that are on the left-hand side right now. We can just focus on what's here. And if we're rounding to the nearest 100, this tells us that 368 is closest to 400. It is much closer to 400 than it is to 300, okay? So 368 to the nearest 100 is the number 400. And notice the 2 zeros at the end when we're rounding to the nearest 100, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Something else that will help us when we're practicing and working with these problems and rounding to the different place values is our rounding list of rules here. So the first step really is to underline, right? It's important to identify the place value that we are rounding to. Underline it so that you know, as a reminder, okay, I'm rounding to the thousands place, as we see is the case here. We're going to look at the digit to the right. So the digit right next to it on the right-hand side. And that digit is going to tell us whether or not our digit in the place value is going to increase by 1 or if it's going to stay as it is. If the digit that is circled, so the digit to the right of the underlined digit is 4 or less, the number will not change. The digit in the place value will not change. If the digit that is circled is greater than 5, then we are going to add 1 to the digit in the place value. So I know that there's a lot of digits happening and numbers happening and this and that, but let's actually look at an example. This will make more sense. Here we have 745,309. This is a large number. Again, we're not going to let this frighten us. We're going to get through it and we'll get it done. So we're rounding this number to the nearest 100,000s place. And it is very important that we pay attention to the place value because our numbers, when we round them, they're not going to be the same. Okay, a number that we round to the tens place, to the hundreds place, to the thousands place, to the 10,000s place, and so on and so forth, is not going to look the same in these different forms. So 745,309. Here's my number. We're going to identify the place value that we're working with. Here it is the 100,000s place, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s. 7 is the digit in the 100,000s place. We're now going to look next door. The digit 4, the digit 4 is less than 5. So this tells us that 7 is going to stay exactly as it is. And all of the digits to the right of that are going to turn into a 0. They're going to become a 0. So 745,309 to the nearest hundreds place is 700,000. This means that 745,309 is much closer to 700,000 than it is to 800,000. Okay, and those are the 200,000s that this number, 745,309, falls in between. Okay, it is much closer to 700,000. So I hope that that was helpful and useful. I have one more trick for you, and this is going to be a major help. It's very important that you pay attention to the place value that you are rounding to, because that is going to be a big hint as to the number of zeros that you should have when you get your final rounded number. If you're rounding to the nearest 10, you should have 1 0. If you're rounding to the nearest 100, you should have 2 zeros. If you're rounding to the nearest 1,000, you should have 3 zeros, and so on and so forth. So in my example here, 4,534 to the nearest 10, is 4,530. There's only 1 0 at the end here. The same number rounded to the nearest 100 gives me a different number. It gives me 4,500. So these are just some little tips and tricks to help you as you're working through your problems and as you're checking your work. I hope that this was very helpful and that this was very useful. And I'm sure that you're going to have a wonderful time with rounding. And I'll see you in the next video.